Welcome, everyone. We will begin the webinar on overcoming paint booth installation challenges. I'm Melissa Jolls with RDA. Allen Jenkins, President of Interstate Marketing Corp, is your presenter today. The presentation will take approximately 15 to 20 minutes. We are recording it and we'll post it on our YouTube channel. If you do have questions during the webinar, you can type them in the chat box at the bottom right of your screen, and Allen will answer them at the end of the presentation. Now, I'll turn it over to Allen.
Good afternoon, RDA members. Thank you guys for taking the opportunity to listen to some of these things. What we want to do today is just go over some basics of a paint booth installation. So I know you guys get a chance to interact with these shops and this major piece of equipment that they've got. The install of the booth is as important, as you know, as the booth itself, and there's lots of things that can go on, different nuances. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some different images and drawings and just talk through some of these things so that hopefully by the end of this you got a little bit of an idea and a better way to have a conversation with your customer so that you can make them feel comfortable with taking on this new asset. So I'm going to show several images of our product, UniCure spray booths, but everything that I'm talking about is generic to the brand. So a lot of these things that you're looking at, they might not be exact to the specific brand that you may be used to, but they certainly are still applicable because we all have to go through the same type thing. So with that, you can see our first slide there is just kind of our generic opening up for UniCure spray booths. We've been doing this since 1980, and we have always done our own installations. So we have a lot of experience and a lot of staff when it comes to getting these things all the way from the sale to actually where the customer can turn them on, get to painting, and start making some money. So let's get rolling here. So let's talk about a typical installation. So there's lots of front-end things that happen regards to permitting, drawings, and what codes are applicable to your particular installation situation. Contracting that comes up as far as gas connections, electrical connections, roof penetrations are a big one that kind of get forgotten because obviously we're bringing air into these paint booths and then it has to come out. Also air lines, and then concrete, which I don't have listed there, but it'll come up in just a little bit, is something else I want to go over as well. And then fire suppression. So there's lots of questions that originate through each one of these topics. We're just going to kind of walk through some stuff. I'm going to share some experiences, some things to look for, and hopefully you'll get some value out of this. So, all right, with that, let's talk about permitting. We get asked all the time, hey, should I pull permits? The short answer is always yes, but then there's a conversation that takes place after that. So the days of being able to install a paint booth without having proper permits are almost gone. If you're in a very rural area or a very light code inspector type area, you can still make that happen. But for the most part, just about everywhere, they are getting more and more stringent on making sure that the proper permitting has been done. So when you go to pull a permit, most municipalities will have some sort of a dollar threshold that is what the customer can pull versus when they'll need a general contractor to pull. So, for example, where I'm at in Nashville, Tennessee, Davidson County has a limit of $25,000. So if the project valuation is what they call it, so the cost of the project is less than $25,000, then the owner has the ability to pull their own permit. That's the easiest thing, the least expensive. Now for $25,000, that'll work for a non-heated style paint booth where you don't have an air makeup system, because generally those products are less than $25,000. Mix rooms, prep stations, those types of things. But if you go over that, then you've got to have a licensed contractor to be able to pull that permit. Typically, that's going to be a general contractor who then would work with the subcontractors, gas, electrical, and the trades that it takes to hook everything up. The next big question is, do I need an architect? Now that's going to depend on how complicated the project is. If you've got an existing facility and you're just adding a booth into an open area that maybe you've cleared out, that type thing, then a lot of times you can get away with just basic layout drawings, which I'm going to show you one here in just a minute. But if you are adding on to your facility or you are doing a pretty substantial remodel that's going to require moving a wall, or maybe there's electrical that's close by because you can't have any electrical panels within 3 feet of an opening of a booth. Or maybe there's just not enough space and you need a little bit more room, so you're having to shift some things around, or sometimes even the roof structure. Any of those pieces of the puzzle that get impacted will begin to make the project a little more complicated, and you'll need an architectural design firm on board with your general contractor to supply the appropriate paperwork to get the permit. All of this that we're talking about is just so that you can do the project on your own property. Isn't it amazing? We got to love the government, but that's how the regulations work. So most of the time when we're advising customers, it's yes, you need to get the proper permits pulled, and then we'll kind of talk to them about the size of the project and where it's going at in location, and say, yeah, all right, in order to do that, you're going to need a general contractor, and they're also going to help you coordinate with your subs, and we work with them throughout that process. And then we go to the architectural question. So that's kind of the permit side of things. When you start talking about drawings, you have the drawings of the product itself. Then you have what's called a layout, which is what I'm showing here, which is going to show something fairly generic, should be the specific product that's being purchased in the location of the facility where it's going to go, some basic dimensions, show how far off each adjacent wall that it might be, and then the air makeup system and the ductwork, trying to show some of those things. This is a great conversation piece for not only is it going to help you get through the permitting process, but with the customer, it really helps them visualize where that booth is going to go inside the facility. And that'll start to initiate some of these other questions, because when you start asking the customer, okay, what's your roof height? And, you know, how wide is this room? How deep is this room? Do you have any electrical on that wall? Those are the kind of conversations that you get into, and this layout really helps you do that. So you want to make sure that you know where that product is going to go. Codes. When it comes to codes, the main governing code for the construction of a paint booth is NFPA 33, Standard for Spray Application Using Flammable or Combustible Materials. And the latest edition of that is 2016. So that's what's going to tell you what type of metal it's got to have in order to build a booth. If it's single wall, it's got to be 18 gauge. If it's double wall, you can use 2 sheets of 20 gauge, things like that. It's going to tell you the venting that has to be on it, the airflow that has to go through it, fire suppression that's supposed to be installed, all those different types of things. And your booth manufacturer should have all of those things down, know how to answer every one of those questions, because that'll be the main thing the codes inspector is looking for. After that, it's going to be your local building code. They're all going to reference the international building code for the most part, but then let's say if you're in North Carolina has a building code that they put above the international building code. So you have to navigate through some of those questions to make sure that the product not only will meet all the listings and requirements for its construction, the booth itself, but then where it is installed is going to meet all the proper building codes, especially something called egress, which is an NFPA 101 life safety, which means you got to have a way to get out. You got to have a way to get out of the booth and a way to get out of the building. You can't block the exit of the building, those types of things. So there's lots of code questions that you go through when you're working with an installation. Let's talk about contracting for a little bit. And I'm just going to blip through concrete, gas, electrical, roof, and air lines to kind of give you some of these pitfalls and the conversations that you need to have. So concrete. Concrete can be a lot of fun. If you've got a downdraft product, you've got to have an exit in the floor, so they're going to be digging a pit. If they are pouring new concrete, this is a great time because they can put the forms in. It'll cost them less money to do that at that time. So if they're adding on or building a facility, doing a pit booth is a lot easier, or downdraft prep, that type of thing, than it is with an existing facility. If it's existing concrete, that's going to have to be saw cut and then formed and re-poured back. Some of the fun stuff that you get into, and I'm going to show you just a couple of drawings of pits. This is a 21-foot single row pit. I just recently had an installation of one of these in Washington State, and the contractor was fantastic, and we wondered why his bid was so low. Come to find out, he did the main trench that I call it, the actual pit, no problem, and he did the fan location, no problem, but he didn't pay any attention to those dotted lines. Yeah, those are tunnels. I don't know how he thought the air was going to get out of the booth, but you've got to make sure and have those conversations with your booth installation professional as well as the concrete contractor that they know that those tunnels have to be connected. The other big thing when forming all that up is a lot of times those tunnels can be just formed out of the concrete, or you can use like a galvanized culvert or some type of pipe. I recently had a contractor ask me, he says, well, I'm just going to put PVC pipe in there. Well, that's a no-no. So you can't put PVC inside of a paint booth because of the static electricity. So that's just a fire hazard waiting to happen with that much air running through a big PVC pipe. So you can't do that. So those are some of the things that you watch for when you're dealing with concrete. And there are more complicated pit designs. We have one we call a 4-tunnel that's shown here. It's a larger footprint, larger area, but of course larger means you got more forms and can be more expensive. Concrete work for a pit can run anywhere from $8,000 to $25,000 depending on how much forming, how much concrete, and part of the country. Some areas are much less expensive on construction costs than others. Now this 4-tunnel pit here, when you look at it, here's an actual picture of it in a finished floor. The way we do this particular model is it's built on a side exhaust style cabin with the boxes down each side, and it sits over this 4-tunnel pit, and the air moves through these side openings, through the pit and up through these side openings. So you'll see something like this in the different styles and configurations that are out there, but you can tell these pillars are formed out of concrete. You can see the tunnels, how they're formed under, and then they go to these openings here. So all of that construction is into getting those pits into the ground. All right, let's look at this picture for a second because it'll lead us into some more conversations. So this is a downdraft side exhaust booth. We've got an air makeup system that is out to the right over here that's suspended from the ceiling. And then we have an intake stack that's in your top right corner. And then since it's side exhaust, this model has 2 exhaust fans. So we have one stack kind of towards the center of the page and one stack towards the left of the page. So what I want to look at now as we talk about the placement of this air makeup system, there are lots of products on the market that the air makeup system is placed on the ground. It's ground supported. So you want to make sure when you're talking to your customer, it's not only the working dimensions of the product, length, width, and height of the actual spray area, but it's the mechanicals that are adjacent to that. So if you have a mechanical system that sits on the floor, that's going to take up 1.5 bays or 2 bays versus if you have a mechanical system that can be placed in the air. This is what we typically try to do, but as you'll see in this next picture, it's not always the case. This is that same air makeup system. It is suspended from the ceiling with threaded rod, which is something you have to pay attention to, is what is the ceiling made out of? If that's a wood truss roof, that's not going to happen. Nobody's going to let you hang that thing from there. It weighs about 1,000 pounds. Also, depending on the part of the country again, if you're in the northern part of the country, especially up in Minnesota, Dakotas, parts of New England, they're worried about snow load. So the roofs are designed to hold a particular amount of impacted snow that freezes on top of the roof. And they were very particular about adding any weight. So a lot of times you end up placing the air makeup system, even a style that can be suspended, may still have to be ground supported, as is the case in this bottom picture. So again, looking at the floor, looking at the roof, trying to determine everything. So it's not about just the space the booth is going to take up, but it's about those connecting elements as well. Once you've got that air makeup system location determined, and it can be on the roof, a lot of new construction, it gets set right out on the roof on top of a curb. The next thing you're going to be dealing with is your gas and electrical contractors. Every air makeup system is going to require a gas and electrical connection. Almost all the products on the market today that are in our industry are either natural gas or propane driven. There is still some waste oil stuff out there, but it's far and few between and not very efficient and nasty to clean. So it's typically natural gas or propane. There's no real cost difference of the equipment for the two. There is some operating cost difference just based on the cost of the fuel. And then you have your electrical connection. So the big thing on electrical is you need to know your phase and your voltage. Don't let a customer tell you he's got 220 volt. That's great, but that could be single phase, like what he's plugging his welder up to, or it could be 3-phase. Typical 3-phase runs from 208 to 230, and then you do have some industrial applications where you'll see a 440 to a 480. But your booth manufacturer will have to know what power is available And then the contractor will have to take the manufacturer's information and let them know how many amps and what size breaker is required to be able to function and run the unit. On the gas line, you'll have a gas line that's supplied, and there's two big numbers. You need to know pressure and volume. For example, the unit we're looking at here is a 1.5 million BTU, and it requires 11 to 14 inches of water column. So BTU is your British thermal unit. That's the volume that you need. That's how much gas needs to be available. The pressure, 11 to 14 inches of water column, that's the amount of pressure that has to be on the line. You have to have both those numbers, and sometimes you will have more than that, and you get into this little gray circle up here. This is your regulator. The regulator brings the gas supply down so that you don't deliver too much to the air makeup system. Then you've got ductwork to consider. You've got to get the fresh air into the air makeup system. This is a hood style here. This is through the roof in this top picture, or through the wall in this bottom picture. Sometimes you try to avoid roof penetrations at all costs, and the intake is a good place where you can take that out the wall. The biggest thing on intake versus exhaust is they have to be 10 feet away. That's a code requirement. Now, looking at other ductwork, you can see this top left picture. The air makeup system is actually on the roof, and then we have a downdraft setup of ductwork that we're doing here. Both exhaust fans are outside with stacks. So you've got 4 roof penetrations in this scenario, 2 delivering air to the booth, 2 delivering, bringing the air out of the booth. Go down to this bottom picture, very same setup, but now everything's inside. So now you've got, this one actually has a wall penetration for the intake and 2 exhaust penetrations for the exhaust. And then you come to the right picture, this air makeup system is outside. So the roof penetration is actually underneath the air makeup system in a down discharge or down blast fashion delivering the air. So all of those ducts that pass through the roof, you've got to open the roof. Somebody's got to cut a hole in that roof structure. And then you need what's called a curb and a collar, or some sort of flashing. So you don't want to put duct through a raw opening. That opening needs to be prepared with usually metal of some kind, a sheet metal type curb. Sometimes they use rubber, and sometimes they use wood, and then cover it with metal. It just kind of depends on the area of the country again, but you'll need something that seals that duct to the structure of the roof so that you don't have leaks, and so that that ductwork is not moving around all the time. So roof work is a critical one. And normally your paint booth contractor is not going to be your roofer, because they're usually traveling, and when your customer has a roof problem, they need to call a local roofer, not the paint booth guy. So roof is a big one. Then we'll talk about airlines. Now the airline itself, that's one of those things that the paint booth for the most part doesn't require air in and of itself to run. Now there are some products on the market that do have some pneumatics built into their controls, and they do require air supply for that. But there is a lot of products that don't need air at all. Everything is electrically driven. So when you think about that, airlines kind of get pushed to the side. Well, there's 2 problems. You can be 100% done with the paint booth, and that's great and all, but how many of you know you got to have an airline to hook a spray gun up to? You can't do much without compressed air. The other problem is there is one safety device that you'll see in that picture here, right here in the middle. This is a solenoid valve. There are various codes that talk about having to have the airflow on in the booth before they will allow compressed air to flow to the spray gun. What they're trying to do is make sure that your painter's not in there painting without ventilation. So you have to have a solenoid valve installed on the airlines. This gets missed a lot, or it gets put to the very last thing in the project, and you're totally done and ready, and then all of a sudden you realize the compressed air is not done, or it's done and doesn't have a valve, and you fail an inspection because you don't have that connection between your air system in the booth and the compressed air system delivering air to the spray gun. A couple of keys on electrical. One is that solenoid valve. It does get power. That is a separate electrical circuit that gets run to that solenoid valve, in addition to the power that is run to the air makeup system and your lights to run the booth. So that is an additional piece of electrical that gets done. The other part of that is fire suppression. There's always an electrical component to fire suppression, because you are tying the fire suppression system into the paint booth controls. Those 2 things have to be connected. So again, your fire suppression has to receive power. Let's talk about fire suppression real quick. So there is a couple different things to note on fire suppression. You'll see a couple pictures here. You see the bags. You see what we call a scutcheon, which is the silver plate here, or the white dome piece here. So a fire suppression system by NFPA 33 is required. Doesn't mean everybody does it, but it is required. So your booth manufacturer, we get asked all the time, well, does your system come with fire suppression? Well, no, because all fire suppression is local. It needs to be installed by a local licensed fire suppression contractor. So they will put in either a wet system or a dry system. So when we talk about keys on fire suppression, that's the first one. If the customer's building is sprinkled, it's going to be less expensive for them to extend that sprinkler system to the paint booth and drop a few heads in there and add fire suppression to the booth. What they have to look at is someone, either a mechanical engineer or the fire suppression specialist, will run a hydraulic calculation on the amount of water pressure available to the building. You may find, although the building is sprinkled, they don't have any other capacity to add additional heads. If that's the case, you go to dry chem. Or if there's not any sprinklers in the building, then you would go to dry chemical, because you wouldn't want to sprinkle the whole building just to sprinkle the paint booth. So a dry chemical system is basically a fire extinguisher with a bunch of pipes running out of it that goes into heads that are in the booth. And there's some sort of link that detects that the fire has happened and then trips and discharges the chemical agent into the booth. One of the big conversations we get into is the temperature on the fire suppression heads. If you're dealing with a heated paint booth, an air makeup system on a paint booth is rated up to 200 degrees. Now, they usually have a high limit switch that stops them at 180. Doesn't mean it's going to be 180 in the booth, or if it is, it's not going to be there long, but you'll have a lot of fire suppression folks that will put in 160 to 180 degree heads. While in theory, that should work, because it should never be that hot for an extended period of time inside the booth, it can get there. So what we always advise is that your fire suppression specialist puts in a head that is rated above 200 degrees, typically 250, that type of thing. If you've got a fire, it's going to get that hot, it's going to go off. So no reason to have a premature discharge on your fire suppression just from the operation of the paint booth. And everywhere that fire suppression penetrates the booth, that area needs to be fire rated caulked, so that is a seal that is appropriate for that system. And then, of course, you see the bags, and you see the little plastic bags. You also see the paper bags. There are codes that are dependent upon that, and that just protects the fire suppression head from actual getting paint overspray on it. And your fire suppression specialist should be able to tell you about those. So with that, a couple of last pictures just to show you. So this is the inside of a downdraft side exhaust booth that was new, obviously. And you can see the fire suppression heads. You see the silver scutcheon. So everything looks nice when it comes through and it's all sealed up. And then this last picture, this is a booth with an attached paint mix room. You see the water fire suppression riser running down the right-hand side of the screen there. Their piping was underground, and then it came up, and they came over and they dropped the heads down off of this main line. You also notice this is an air makeup system that's sitting on a stand. You also see the intake duct going through the roof and two exhaust stacks going through the roof. And you also see these exhaust stacks are not straight. They had to have an offset. Offsets are almost never included. So all of these different things, whether it's from the permitting to the contracting to the actual install to the fire suppression to talking to electricians, those are all things that need to be considered. And a lot of time your customer will spend as much money on the contracting side of the paint booth project as they did on the booth itself. So that is a great conversation to have, is when they're putting together their budget. Let's just say you got a new downdraft solid exhaust booth delivered and installed. It's going to run somewhere around $60,000. They may spend half of that again, another 30 grand, on the additional subcontract costs. So talk to your spray booth installation professional that's dealing with that, and make sure that they are helping you kind of put together some kind of budget. And then the general contractor would actually get bids on those things. But your customer needs to know they're in for a lot of expense beyond just the paint booth itself. And of course, with us, we've been doing this a long time. We've got installation crews we send out all over the country, and a complete project team on the inside here, which is the advantage to RDA members, is that you don't have to be experts on all these things. we've got a team in place to do that, and we'll work with you every step of the way to make sure that you got a happy customer at the end of this. So again, I just want to thank you guys for your time and walking through these steps with me. Hopefully this made you kind of think and gets you a little bit more comfortable with overcoming some of these installation issues. Thank y'all.
Does anybody have any questions for Allen? I will follow up with everybody who attended the presentation, and I'll get you his information, as well as Dwayne Dean, who works with Allen, will get you his information as well. And they will be in Denver at the March meeting, so you can also talk to them there. You can ask them any questions there as well. I don't see anything, Allen, so you did a great job, really thorough, and appreciate everybody attending Allen's presentation, and we'll be in touch with future training opportunities. Thanks, Allen.
Fantastic. Thank you everybody so much.